Support for Wavemakers comes from listeners like you and the Tampa Bay Times. The Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper is available around the Tampa Bay area and online at tampabay.com. Thanks to the Tampa Bay Times for their support.
Good morning and welcome to Wavemakers on WMNF with Janet and Tom, a weekly conversation with people making a difference in the Tampa Bay region. I'm Janet.
And I'm Tom.
And today's program is pre-recorded, so we won't be taking any phone calls or emails.
Our guest today is Bob Plunkett. He made waves for nearly 40 years as a gossip columnist at Sarasota magazine. And now, at the age of 78, he's caught the attention of the likes of The New Yorker, The New York Times, and the Paris Review, thanks to the re-release of his 1983 comic novel, My Search for Warren Harding. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, the headline of the New Yorker article is, one of the funniest, gayest writers is finally becoming famous. There's a lot to unpack there in that headline, but let's start with the statement that you're finally becoming famous. Did you think it would take this long?
No, I didn't. I thought it would happen instantaneously 40 years ago, but it did not.
So at 78 now, you've been written up in the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Paris Review. Your book is re-released. Prior to this point, which I would say perhaps maybe is the peak of your career, what would you have said was the peak of your career? It's been, been a long one.
The peak of my career was working with Madonna, as shallow as that sounds, but that was the most interesting part of it.
Now, in what context did you work with her?
She optioned the movie rights to my second novel, Love Junkie, which we're not discussing today, but she did. And we had some long conversations about it. She invited me over to her house, and we kind of became friends. It was very interesting.
How did you end up working with her? Did you just get a call one day? Hi, this is Madonna?
She read the book. She's a big reader. In fact, there's that famous quote of hers when somebody asked her about sex, and she said, "Sex? I'd rather read a book." And she, I think she really would. And for some reason, she identified with the main character. Don't ask me why, because the main character is a very meek, mild housewife from Westchester County. But for some reason, she saw herself in that character and fell in love with the book.
But let's talk about your first book, because the first book did get a lot of attention when it was first published. And that must have given you, as you mentioned, the hope that there was going to be more to come after that. So what was that like to have your first book published and to get that attention?
Well, you never get enough attention. So I thought the attention I got when Warren Harding came out was, okay, but not enough. And then it kind of died down. And, and I kept writing and published another book and a lot of magazine stuff. So, I was quite content. But then gradually things started to dry up, and I ended up in a trailer park in Florida.
Well, we're going to talk about how you ended up at the trailer park in Florida, but let's talk more about the book, My Search for Warren Harding. We're talking to Bob Plunkett, a Sarasota-based author who 40 years ago, his book, My Search for Warren Harding, was published, and it's being re-released. It's been re-released now. In a nutshell, Bob, tell us what the book is about.
The book is about a very pompous and self-centered and rather annoying New Yorker named Elliot Weiner, and he's a college professor in history, and his specialty is Warren Harding and his presidency. And he finds out that a mistress of Warren Harding is still alive and lives in a crumbling old mansion in Hollywood Hills. and he realizes that she probably has letters and memorabilia and stuff from her relationship with Harding, and if he can get his hands on it, his career is made. So he sets off for Los Angeles to do this, and that's what the book is about.
And at the time it was published, the Washington Post called it one of the top 5 books of comic American fiction. And I'm curious what you think about being categorized in that way. I mean, when we introduced you, we talked about how this is a comic novel. Did you set out to write a comic novel?
No, I thought it was absolutely ordinary fiction. I mean, I was hoping there was some funny stuff in it, but it was not. I did not set out to write a comic novel. No.
Were you inspired by comic novelists as you were, growing up, or whatever? Was there a comic novelist that you particularly admired and had maybe influenced your work in a way that you weren't even aware?
What really influenced my work when I was growing up were a series of women writers who wrote books about everyday life that were nonfiction. Irma Bombeck was one of them. Betty McDonald was one of them. Jean Kerr. And these were women with a rather sharp sense of humor, and they would tell stories about their everyday lives and their raising their children. And for some reason, I just thought they were hilarious. They are hilarious. And they had an enormous effect on my writing. I wanted to write like they did.
And do you feel that you accomplished that?
No. Really honest. Because I realized that kind of writing can only go so far. And that, a novel needs a much kind of deeper, it's a much deeper process. So I had to teach myself how to develop that.
Right.
And so I set about teaching myself.
One of the things about this book, the character, he goes to Los Angeles, and what he does is he woos a woman he is not attracted to, who is very heavy, correct, in order to have access to this information that he is seeking. So some of the humor comes from there, and some of it is kind of little maybe edgy, and some people would say maybe not politically correct. Is that correct? Is that an accurate assessment of how I'm putting it?
It's terribly politically incorrect.
Terrible. So, and that's part of the humor, yeah.
But when I wrote it, I don't even think that term existed, politically incorrect.
Right.
And so it was not, nobody said, oh, this is politically incorrect. They said this is mean-spirited.
And people called it that when it came out, mean-spirited?
The people who didn't like it, that's what they hated about it. They thought the guy was mean.
And other people thought it was amusing. Is it the kind of book that you think might be published these days, or do you think it would be harder to get it published in this time that we're living in?
Oh, it would not be published today. I can guarantee you that. Absolutely not.
And yet it is being republished. How did that...
I know. Isn't it weird? I can't figure it out.
So that seems to be okay, but if it was a new piece of fiction, then perhaps they would not be so thrilled to do it. But I am curious, though. The New Yorker referred to you as one of the gayest writers. Did you set out to write a gay novel?
No, absolutely not. Because I'm very much in the closet when it comes to being gay.
at least at your trailer park.
I camouflaged the gayness pretty well. And I did at first. Nobody realized there was a gay element to it at first. Now it's, I guess the world has moved on and they can see it much more clearly.
Well, the main character doesn't even realize he's gay, right?
Not on any conscious level that he could discuss coherently, no.
And so this became, in many ways, a cult classic. It went out of print. I don't know how that feels to have a book published and then it goes out of print. How does that feel, by the way?
Oh, it's a shock for a day or so, and then, you realize at least it's not cancer, so you get over it.
But how did it come to be that it's now being republished?
The book, like you say, did become a kind of a cult classic, and it developed fans, and they would talk about it with each other and post things online about it. And
some famous fans, too, by the way, right, Bob? I mean, from what I understand, Larry David is a big fan.
Yeah, Larry David was a big fan of it, and Frank Rich, who was, the drama critic for the New York Times for years and years.
And also, just as an aside, there also was the one of the creators behind the TV series Succession, which a lot of people are turned off by because there's not a single redeeming character in that entire show. So I find that fascinating that we have come to the point where you published a novel where you really didn't have, you had a very unlikable character, and now that's kind of common on TV, and I don't know.
Well, it's common in our lives.
Yeah. But anyway, so getting back to, it did become a cult classic, and it did get some followers, famous folks, and not so famous folks, people passing the book around, right? They would find it at used bookstores or whatever. So eventually it found its way to a publisher? How did that work?
They some of the, quote, fans, had connections, particularly to a publisher called New Directions, which publishes fiction that's not really all that commercial. It's things like novelists from Nicaragua and people like, they do Tennessee Williams. They do, who's that lady who lived in Massachusetts? Emily Dickinson. People like that, and the people at New Directions really liked it, so they decided maybe this would work.
And we watched a reading that you did in New York. They flew you up there. You had a reading at a bookstore. Looks like quite a rapt audience, probably a lot of these fans who had been reading it for years. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, there were two of them, actually, and they were a lot of fun. And just as we were starting one of the readings, there was this girl, maybe she was 20 years or old or so, and she's in the bookstore. And she said, "What's this book about Warren Harding?" She wasn't there for the reading. And she said, "Well, I'm related to Warren Harding." She was some great niece or something. So I was so excited. And so I was so excited that she left. So
Did you frighten her?
You never knew who was going to come to one of your readings.
To what extent is there an element of historical fiction to this novel?
All of the Harding stuff, and I should explain that there's a lot of historical narrative in it, so that chapters of it read like a history book of the Harding presidential administration and his private life. And all of that is true. It has been altered a little so that I don't get sued, but basically all the historical stuff in it is true.
And why the interest in Warren G. Harding?
It was just one of those things that I got obsessed with years and years ago. But he did have a fascinating life. He was a total nonentity, and he ended up president of the United States. I'm not going to draw any analogies, but he was very much the Trump of his day, only not anywhere near as clever as Mr. Trump.
Interesting. And
now, Gordon Lish, was he your editor at Knopf?
Yes, Gordon Lish was a famous editor at Knopf.
Yeah, famous editor.
And a friend of mine is a novelist named Ann Beattie. she showed him the book, and he kind of fell in love with it, and he was the first editor of the first edition.
And your experience with that, editing with such a well-known editor, what was that like? Some writers have a great relationship with their editors, and others not so much. How did it go for you?
He kept saying, I don't know why I'm publishing this book. It's not literature. And that was a little off-putting. But then he would say, however, this is a lot harder to do than literature. So that made me feel a little bit better. And as far as changing things, he changed 5 words.
Holy cow, that's got to be a record.
Do hardly any editing at all.
And your book did get quite a good reaction. Did Knopf then publish your second novel?
No, they wouldn't publish my second novel. Gordon Lish read my second novel, and he said, get it out of here. I hate it.
Oh, so where'd you take it?
No. I took it to HarperCollins.
And it was published, and Madonna found it, and we've already heard that story. So
let's talk a little bit about how you became a writer, because that was not your first career path, correct? You started off in theater and acting. That was what your first passion was. Is that correct?
I guess you could say that. I got out of college, and I, like a lot of people back in those days, I went to New York to kind of like make a career. I didn't know what, and I fell into acting, and I worked off Broadway at places like Cafe La Mama, and it was a wild, crazy time. It was a very, very exciting place to work. You met a lot of very interesting people, some of whom went on to become very famous, and most of whom are now dead and totally forgotten. But it was very creatively exciting.
So how did you end up going from that to writing?
I had a day job at a place called the New York State Council on the Arts, and we gave out grants, state grants to arts organizations, and I would have to write long reports about the financial situation at the Metropolitan Opera. And for some reason, these just came out so funny that we'd have meetings and everybody was in stitches reading my financial reports.
That doesn't happen very often.
No. So I realized maybe I'm onto something. So I decided that I should try and take this a little more seriously and figure out how to write a novel.
And you were writing that in your spare time at night, or how did that work? You go to coffee shops?
I started writing it in my spare time, and then I decided to take a big gamble. I quit my job. I got on unemployment, and I every day went to the reading room of the New York Public Library and wrote.
Wow, that's and lots of things have been written there. Robert Caro famously has done a lot of research and writing at that library.
Yes, and you could see all the wannabe writers sitting there working on their novels.
Yeah, yeah.
But the plan sort of worked, amazingly enough.
And then you've lived all over the world. You were born in Texas, but lived all over the world. How did you end up in Sarasota? What brought you to Sarasota?
I was looking for a place to work on my second novel, and my brother had been living in Sarasota, and he was moving, and his house was going to be empty, and I thought I'll go there for 3 months and do a little work. And I came here in 1985, and I never left. So that's how I ended up here.
And you wrote a gossip column for Sarasota Magazine for 40 years, and you called that Mr. Chatterbox. You were called Mr. Chatterbox. Now, the name Mr. Chatterbox did come from a comic novel, correct?
Yeah, it comes from Evelyn Waugh's book, Vile Bodies. Mr. Chatterbox is a continuing character, and various people become Mr. Chatterbox at different times in the book because they always get fired for doing something wrong.
So 40 years as Mr. Chatterbox, you've had some interesting experiences there in Sarasota, one of which involved Catherine Harris, who at the time was not the Florida Secretary of State, but she was soon to be the Florida Secretary of State.
She wasn't even a legislator. She was a rich housewife? I don't know.
Sarasota socialite?
How would you describe her, Bob?
A rich Sarasota socialite.
Yeah.
No, she had not gone into politics. And in fact, I asked her to appear in what was, in effect, a little nightclub act I was doing. And she was like the Vanna White character who would come out and just assist me and help me out. And she'd never really been on a stage before, or she'd never really done any kind of public speaking or anything like that. And she kind of took to it, and it kind of started her career.
Well, she did do a chicken dance, did perform a chicken dance.
Yes, and she did a chicken dance.
She did a chicken dance, but to a certain extent, we could say that maybe you're responsible for Catherine Harris's political career by giving her the opportunity to speak to an audience and finding herself comfortable with that.
Yes, and Catherine and I are still good friends.
And the chicken...
I like her tremendously. I don't judge people by their politics.
There was a lot of interest in a videotape of that chicken dance, I understand, during the 2000...
Yes, I had a videotape of the chicken dance, and during the contested election...
When Catherine Harrison was the Secretary of State, yes.
President of the United States.
Yeah.
The National Enquirer found out that I had a tape of her doing the chicken dance, and they wanted it very badly and offered me a lot of money. And if you'd seen the videotape and watched Catherine do the chicken dance, your first thought would be, I don't want this person deciding who the president's going to be. So I felt very guilty about embarrassing her, so I kept it to myself. And we ended up with Mr. Bush as president.
Now, you don't judge people by their political party. I respect that very much. You have been in Sarasota for a long time, and I'm sure seen changes there. So Sarasota now has become sort of this bastion of the right wing. Do you have any sense of what happened? How did that happen to Sarasota? Have you been watching this slow change, or is it stunning to you?
Well, I don't particularly want to get into politics. It was wonderful in the old days because everybody, no matter what the political affiliation was, they were still friends and they still worked together on charity events and things like that. And actually, with the 2000 election, that started to change, and then it became more and more polarized. The Republicans became much, much more clever about winning elections, and the Democrats became much, much stupider about elections. And the whole thing has turned into a situation where there's two sides and they're constantly fighting and bickering, and it's not pleasant and it's not fun.
It's not pleasant, not fun. And there's also, we've got Michael Flynn down there and
Michael Flynn, I love him. I just went to hear his speech.
You did?
You love him. Talk about that.
Yeah, he's terrific. I mean, he's as a personality I want to write about. He's terrific.
Right.
Put it that way.
So you're probably finding a lot of that in Sarasota. I mean, there's good fodder for writing something about, just True Social is, I think, based there.
Truth Social is based, the Trump's
Social is based there. We have
thing.
The change at New College. There's a lot going on.
Oh, the school
there.
board,
There's a tremendous amount going on. And back in the old days, I would have had a ball. But, like I say, I'm 78, and it has become so poisonous that I'm pretty much staying out of it.
And is there any chance that your book would ever be in a school or taught in a classroom or maybe...
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, okay.
It should be banned.
It should be banned. Well, that would probably be good for you if it was banned. Might help your sales if it was banned.
I'm hoping.
So we were talking about how you settled in Sarasota, but you were born in Texas, lived all over the world, including in Cuba, and your family left Cuba after the revolution. What was that experience like? Can you tell us about that?
Well, we were living in Havana, and I loved Havana. It was my favorite place. Of all the places we ever lived, that was my favorite place. And unfortunately, my father was president of the Cuban Electric Company, which was a foreign-owned utility in a country that was becoming communist. And things were getting very, very unpleasant. They were having riots in the streets and shooting people with the firing squad. And we decided maybe it was time to get out of Cuba. So we left very, very suddenly, leaving everything behind.
Do you have any interest in going back?
I've been back several times.
Did you go back to where you were living at the time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we lived in a very fancy suburb, and it had changed so much. And the houses had fallen into total disrepair. Many of them had just crumbled into little pieces. It was very sad. You know, most people go to Havana and they think, oh, with this quaint place. And I just know what Havana used to be, and it's become, a ruin of what it was, full of very poor people. It's very unhappy.
It's crumbling, and there is a certain amount of equality in Cuba in the sense that everybody's poor except for maybe the government leaders, you know.
Oh, the people who are running it are not poor. Believe me, they are not poor.
Right.
Well, I think, and then people go and they find it to be like almost quaint, the old cars and everything. And what the tourists are really seeing is the poverty and what's happening there.
But the Cuban people themselves are so wonderful, and that's another thing.
Cubans are great.
Yeah.
I love Cubans. They're the smartest people in the world.
They're very clever. I mean, the way they have kept those cars going for all these years.
Gangsters that are running their country. It's really awful.
It's really a shame. Yeah.
Well, and also it's a community with lots of art and music and artistic expression. That was what my experience of Cuba was.
Yes. Every restaurant nowadays has a band. I think the government does that on purpose or something. To give people jobs, but that was fun. Every little coffee shop, every little bodega has a band.
I did want to ask you, Bob, going back to your experiences in New York City, because eventually you did make your way to New York City after all these other places you had lived around the world. And we mentioned that you had gotten to know, or you mentioned that you'd gotten to know some famous people. Griffin Dunne was a friend of yours, and you appeared in a film, After Hours, with Griffin Dunne, directed by Martin Scorsese. How did that happen, and what was that like?
Well, Griffin was producing the movie and also starring in it. And there was a part for this very shy gay guy. And they'd already cast the part, but Griffin kept thinking, gee, Bob might be good for this. So he got me an audition with Mr. Scorsese. And I immediately realized that Mr. Scorsese, genius that he is, knew virtually nothing about gay men and how they dress, how they act. And I could help him with this. And I did. I explained it to him. and he got it. So he gave me the part. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
I understand that film is going to be re-released soon.
Yes, that also has become a cult favorite. When it was first released, it got kind of mediocre reviews, and now it's considered a real classic.
Well, they actually even based one episode of Ted Lasso on that movie. There was one episode, I think, in season 2 where Coach Beard has this wild night. It's very much like After Hours. It's a great movie.
I think it might have even been called After Hours. But
it was, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So
It's
speaking of having been in a movie, a Martin Scorsese movie, you've had lots of experiences that led the New Yorker to say you've had a Zelig-like life. You were actually at the Sarasota Elementary School when President Bush learned that a second plane had struck the World Trade Center. You were in a movie with Richard Gere that was never released. And you frequented the movie theater where Paul Rubens, the actor who played Pee Wee Herman, was arrested.
The late, great Pee Wee Herman.
Great Pee Wee Herman.
Yes.
And we talked about your friendship with Catherine Harris. How is it that you always seem to end up in these places, at the right place at the right time, I guess?
Because I was a gossip columnist in a small town. And when you have a job like that, it's your job to be at everything interesting that's happening in the town. And every once in a while, incredible things happen in a small town. 9/11 being a perfect example. Not that it happened here, but the president was here when it happened.
Right.
So, these moments of history really happen right in front of you.
And how did you end up
They're covering it for your gossip column.
Yes. So how did you end up at that elementary school? So many of us have seen the videos or the photos of the president learning about the second plane.
The President Bush invited me to go on his educational tour of Florida in 2001, and it started out in Jacksonville, and he made a speech, and there were seminars, and then I got to ride on the press plane to Sarasota. And then the next morning, there was another event, which is the one during which the Twin Towers were attacked. So I was officially part of the press contingent on that trip, and that was just out of the blue to stumble into this world-shaking event was quite remarkable.
I think you mentioned.
Of course, I thought.
Yep.
Gee, here I am stuck in this stupid school in Florida and the world's falling apart. I had no idea that I was right in the middle of part of it. So,
right. So one of the things that you're doing now is you are writing for Forum magazine. That is the magazine of Florida Humanities. And you wrote something recently about the summer issue that's out now. You wrote about living in a trailer park. Tell us about trailer park living. I don't think most people think of a trailer park as a place where an acclaimed writer would be living.
Well, it's where poor acclaimed writers live. I've become fascinated with them as a social situation and the kind of people who live here and the way they work. And that's very, very interesting. But believe me, if I had a whole lot of money, I would probably be living somewhere else. But as a place to live, the one I lived in anyway is very, very nice. It's gated. It has beautiful winding streets. Everything's very well manicured. There's 2 swimming pools. So I'm doing fine living-wise.
And the sense of community, is there a from what I read in the article that you wrote about it, there's a real sense of community that you get in a trailer park community or a manufactured home community. I think we call it trailer park. That's almost like a prerogative or a
pejorative.
No, they don't like
yeah.
that, but still, that's what people call them. And there is very much a sense of community because most of them are retired people who've lived somewhere else, and then they retire to Florida and they make friends with the neighbors. And it's a very closely knit situation, and everybody takes care of everybody else. So
But,
from that point of view, it's very satisfactory.
And
you feel you're being watched out for, and if there's a problem, the neighbors help.
And you were actually relocated from one manufactured home community to another after Hurricane Ian. You had a pretty scary experience there. What was that like?
Yeah, when Ian happened, when was that? That was a year ago, September, the end of September, or it will be a year ago.
Yep.
I was living in Englewood in another trailer park, somewhat similar to this one, and it was hit directly by the hurricane, and the trailer was pretty much destroyed, and I sold it as is and moved here, and that wasn't much fun, I'll tell you.
Did you evacuate, or did you try riding out the storm at home?
I tried riding out the storm until it became clear that I better get out of there quick because things were blowing into the trailer and the roof was blowing off. So I got out of there. But then I came back the next day and had to live in the ruins of the trailer without electricity or gasoline or food for 5 days.
Wow.
Because I couldn't go anywhere. You were stuck. You were absolutely stuck.
Absolutely stuck, and you all had to depend on each other because you didn't have a lot of. There wasn't help coming immediately, right? It was slow to come.
There was no help. The police never showed up. The fire department never showed up. FEMA never showed up. The National Guard never showed up. The only people who showed up were the Baptist churches, and they would bring around food, and you would say a prayer with them, and they'd give you some food, and I was eternally grateful.
But the other people who showed up, you write in that article, were your neighbors.
Oh, yeah, and the neighbors, I was a little standoffish from the neighbors until this happened. And then we had to solve this crisis together. You know, we had to get the trees out of the street. We had to figure out a way to keep surviving. So we all became best friends. And it was you saw a very good side of human nature. It was nice. It was very nice.
And part of what you write about in that article is about just the history of the trailer parks and how not trailer parks, but mobile homes, trailers, how they've evolved over the years from what they started. I think the back in the 40s, 30s when they first came out. So you have a nice history of how those trailers evolved. You do write quite a bit about architecture, at least for the Forum magazine. Tell us about that. Why the interest in architecture? Where's that come from? And is that something that you've studied, or?
That comes from my folks.
Okay.
And I can't explain it. They were architecture freaks. And, you know, we were always moving around, so we were always looking for a house. We must have lived in 10 or 12 different houses. And my folks were very fussy about where they lived. They always wanted a nice, fancy house. And they ended up hiring a famous architect named Ricardo Legarreta, who's a Mexican architect, to design them a house in Mexico City, which was beautiful, beautiful, extremely modern house. So it's like in my DNA.
Huh. And yet you're living in a trailer park. What would your parents think of that?
They are dead, thank God. Not that they're...
They don't have to see it.
They would be appalled.
That's pretty funny. So you're writing next. I hear about Cinderella's Castle. Is that correct? You're going to be writing about that for Florida Humanities?
I just finished it, and it's all wrong. I have to totally rewrite it because of the governor and what he's doing with Disney and, you know, the site. And it's just, I just want to write a nice story about Cinderella's Castle, but it's turned into this big political event, and it's very difficult to make it work. So, what could you possibly say about Cinderella's Castle that might be offensive to anybody? You cannot explain it unless you get into the culture war situation. Because I don't know if you've been following what's going on with the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. Have you?
No, I have not followed the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. I know the song Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo from Cinderella, but no.
They have in Cinderella's castle, they have something called the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. And if you're from ages 3 to 12, you can go there and get dressed up like a princess or a knight. And it's very expensive. It's like $200. And they do a makeover. The problem is, if a boy wants to get dressed up like a princess, they will gladly do it. Now, in the present situation in Florida, that is playing with fire.
Right.
So, and that is what's happening in the Cinderella Castle. So, it's like the whole thing has been, now it's a big mess about sexualizing children, transgendering children. It's very sad what's going on.
Interesting. And, of course, no big deal for a little girl probably to be dressed up in knight's clothes.
I don't know if any of the girls would actually want to do that, because between you and me, the princess outfits are much, much nicer. Nice outfits.
Probably way more comfortable.
Pardon?
Probably way more comfortable as well.
Did you go to Cinderella's castle and spend some time in there checking out the architecture?
I've been there enough to not to have to go back, because one of the things I shouldn't say about Forum magazine is that they're very cheap about expenses.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's okay. So, you can say that it's a nonprofit. They need to be cheap about expenses.
We should probably mention that. Janet works
for Florida Humanities.
She edits. She's edited some of your stories.
Janet knows.
Yes.
Well, they are a nonprofit, and they don't have a lot of money to spend, but yeah.
I thought you could stay at Cinderella's castle. Didn't there used to be you could actually spend the night there? I thought that was an opportunity.
Yeah,
there was an option. They took that.
There's a rather tacky-looking hotel suite hidden there, and it was theoretically built for Walt Disney. And they used to let people win prizes, and then the prize was they got to stay in the suite. But they don't even do that anymore. And I really wanted a tour, and they wouldn't do that. Disney's very uncooperative at the moment. I think they have too much on their mind.
Yeah, definitely.
They're under a lot of pressure, let's face it.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, I know you don't I know you don't want to talk about politics much, but you as somebody who is, it's gay, it must bother you what's happening right now in the country and in the state of Florida. Is it troublesome to you, or do you just not look at it, compartmentalize?
That's a good question. I'm so old that I've seen people's attitude toward gayness go from, it's been everything. It's been totally demonized. Your family would disown you, and then it became acceptable, and now you can even get married. It's like this crazy pendulum that's always going off in some different direction. Am I unhappy about what's going on now? I mean, it's disgraceful, and it's being done for very craven political motives. So, I guess so. But gay people are amazing. They're very, very adaptable, and they're not going anywhere. And, and they keep fighting and creating wonderful lives for themselves.
Well, I mean, and it was in your lifetime that men, I believe, were arrested for wearing women's clothing. That was illegal.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. You're absolutely right. It was.
And, I think that's how the whole Stonewall riot began, is that they started, the police went in there.
And I was living in New York at Stonewall, and I remember, the drag queens used to hang out on the steps of St. Veronica's Church, which was down the block from Stonewall, and they couldn't wear dresses on the subway because they would be arrested. So they'd get to St. Veronica's and change their clothes in the lobby.
Yeah.
And then hang out on the church steps. And, and as awful as that sounds, it was kind of fun. It was, you were outlaws. It was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes people were arrested. When I was in college in Norfolk, Virginia, a friend of mine was a drag queen, and he got arrested outside of a gay club. He was in his car, and he was taken to jail. He was literally arrested for wearing women's clothes.
Yes. But also, at that point in New York, there were artists like Candy Darling and Jackie Curtis, Holly Woodlawn working. And, they were drag queens in the most amazing way. And, enormously talented artists. And things were starting to change. They were definitely starting to change. And you were seeing how drag was could be incorporated into art, and how amazing these people were. The bravery they had to do that.
Well, and then interesting what you have now, which is funny, is in terms of drag, like Harry Styles. I mean, he wears dresses. That's a thing now. It's a fashion statement in a lot of ways that men are wearing. Dresses and skirts and dressing, it's more androgynous in terms of how people dress. So such a contradiction.
I don't think men look good in frilly clothes. It's just me. But
I just want to say dresses are comfortable. As a woman, as someone who wears dresses are more comfortable than pants. Just saying. Having that waistband.
I don't believe that.
Well, Bob,
each one's cut differently. The good thing about pants is they're all the same.
True.
So you don't have to adjust to a strange fit.
Well, we've only got a few more minutes.
I'm a big pants person.
We've only got a few more minutes left, and if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Bob Plunkett, who is a cult comic novelist whose book, My Search for Warren Harding, was recently republished and to great acclaim, and has been written up in the New Yorker and the New York Times, and it's great to have you on the show, Bob. We should reemphasize that you did write for Sarasota Magazine for decades, but now you're retired. How are you spending your time now? Is there another novel coming?
There's one that I'm working on very seriously, and I'm also doing freelance. So I'm keeping very, very busy, and then I've got to walk the dog and watch TV a lot and stuff like that. So,
can you tell us about the novel that you're working on? I don't want to jinx it, but
I hate talking about stuff I'm working on, so I'm probably not going to.
Okay, that's fine. I am curious, though, about your approach to writing. Do you write in the morning? Do you write at night? Do you go to a coffee shop? Or you go finding a library in Sarasota to go to, like you wrote your first book?
We just visited Ernest Hemingway's house in Key West, and they told us there he wrote from 6 in the morning till about 2 in the afternoon, and then he started drinking.
Yeah. He had a very nice studio there at his house.
I've been to his house many times. Do you remember the floor in the bathroom, the tile floor in the bathroom, too? That was beautiful.
Oh, yeah, that Art Deco tile, very, very cool.
Yeah.
So what is your habit? Where do you write, and what time of day?
I write in the morning, and usually for a couple hours, and then in the afternoon I do errands, have fun, go swimming, and then after dinner, when things quiet down, I write for a couple hours more.
And how do you write? What do you use to write? Are you using a laptop or?
I've taught myself to use a laptop. I used to always write on legal pads longhand, and it's become very inefficient.
Right.
So my search for Warren
now
Harding
I
was
do it
written
all
out
on
in
my
longhand, and then you typed it up? Is that how you did it?
That's how everybody did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about when you're the gossip column? Now that you would have been working on a computer, I would take it. I would assume.
No, I always wrote everything longhand first, and there's a reason it's better. It takes a tiny bit longer, and your brain has a tiny bit more time to compose itself, and you keep asking yourself, "Is this really what I want?" And so writing longhand, you're I would guess 10% better than on a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much convenience gained by just doing it all on a laptop that you end up doing it on a laptop.
Yeah. And
do you think you will ever stop writing? You seem like somebody who probably is just compelled to write. You talk about walking the dog and that sort of thing, but it seems like something that you will never stop doing.
Well, I don't know. What would stop me is the older you get, the stamina goes, the concentration goes, and I think eventually it's too hard to put the words together. I mean, I know a bunch of very old writers now, and it happens to all of them eventually.
Right, yeah.
It's not dementia, but they don't have the mental acuity to do it, and they end up like that poor senator who can't remember where she is or what's going on.
Right. Well, just, word recall.
But you enjoy the process of writing. I personally, as a former newspaper writer, it seems like a lot of work. It's work to me to write. But for many artists, and I would consider you an artist, it's just something they have to do. Is that the way you feel? You enjoy it. You enjoy the process.
When it's going right, it is so much fun. You think, "Oh, I'm so clever. Look at the sentence I just wrote." Mm-hmm. You just propel yourself along out of delight, and that's what I love about it.
We've got just a few minutes left, so I want to ask you one final question, Bob. We've talked a lot about your writing. Tell us, what are you reading? What any books that you can recommend, other than your own, of course? But what inspires you? What do you read?
I'm reading a lot of books about Melania Trump.
Really?
Which is kind of a dead end. She's not that interesting.
Huh. Is there a wealth of books about Melania Trump?
Oh, yeah, by people who used to work for her. Now they're writing tell-alls and, those kind of books.
Okay. So that sounds like good gossip columnist book, like a good gossip columnist stuff to tell-alls.
Yeah, unfortunately, the problem with her is that there really isn't that much to tell. I keep looking for the story about Melania Trump, and I just can't find it.
Anything else you're reading?
I'm reading a lot of very superficial books about the Civil War because I actually am working on something about the Civil War. That's what I won't tell you. But I'm doing research about the Civil War.
And where you kind of research it, is that historical fiction or history books or source documents? What are you looking at? Where are you doing your research?
Diaries from the Civil War period and stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool.
I look forward to reading whatever you end up producing, Bob, because I have to say that everything I've read by you is just jumps out the page for me. You're just a delightful writer, I think. I encourage everyone to try to find your work on the Forum magazine, Florida Humanities. And you can also find a lot of your previous work for Sarasota Magazine online, right? If you Google.
Yes, there's a tremendous amount of it online and on the Sarasota Magazine website.
Yep. All right. Well, Bob, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it very much. Bob Plunkett, his book that is out now is My Search for Warren Harding. This is Wavemakers, Janet and Tom with Wavemakers on WMNF Tampa.
Thanks, Bob.